Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to do a highly requested video. I've had a lot of people ask me for baking and baking tips, and we're going to make a classic German chocolate cake. Of course, in true Drea fashion, there's going to be a little twist, but not anything that you can't handle. So I'll make sure that I talk you through a lot of the process. For those who've baked cakes before, you may know some of these things, but I think it'll be some information that is helpful to you, not just in making a German chocolate cake, but any cake that you bake. All right, guys, come along with me.
The German chocolate cake is a little different because you do have to bake it in the baking dishes with parchment paper. So the first thing we're going to do before we even start baking the cake is prepare the parchment paper by cutting it out. I like to measure it, and then what I usually do is measure one and then stack the parchment paper and layer it and cut enough for all three. I'm actually making 3 layers. That's why I have 3 cups of flour, but you can certainly make this recipe with 2 layers, and then if you did, you would just cut the flour. Then what you're going to do, and this is for any baking situation, I like to use Baker's Joy. So when I started this recipe, I realized that I only had a little bit of Baker's Joy. So I used the little bit that I did have, but then I ended up going old school by using your typical Crisco along with a coating of flour. That part of the process is really important because you want your cake to come right out of the dish when you're baking. Next, I took the bar of German chocolate. I like to use the Baker's brand of German chocolate, and I cut up the pieces of chocolate. That's not necessarily a mandatory part of the process, but I do like to cut up the pieces so they're much easier to melt when you put them in. What I use is the coffee. So you can certainly use the water that's recommended, but I like to melt my German chocolate with coffee. Coffee is a wonderful addition to any chocolate dish, and so I used a cup and a half of coffee, and that melted the chocolate. And you want to set it aside. This is something you want to do early because you don't want the coffee to be hot. Next, I'm going to proceed with sifting my flour. What I usually do before I even measure out the flour for the recipe is sift a whole lot of flour because I want to have my flour already sifted and ready. So once I sift a lot of the flours and you'll see the leftover lumps, I then scoop into the actual cup that I'm using. You don't use the cup to scoop because you want it to be exactly level. So I use a separate spoon to scoop into the cup measurement, and then I level it off with a knife. When it comes to the German chocolate recipe, there are a lot of pre-steps. So the next thing I do is separate my egg yolks from my egg whites. You do not have to use the same thing I'm using. You can certainly do it by using the shell, but I found that I like using an egg white separator because it's just much more helpful, and you can definitely see the separation of the yolk from the white. Now I'm going to mix up my dry ingredients. For this recipe, I've already measured it out. You could definitely look down in the comments for the exact measurements, but you're going to want to mix all of your dry ingredients. I like to use a whisk. And then, of course, with the chocolate in there, with the powdered chocolate, you're going to see that the flour mixture is going to change color. And now finally we're ready to actually start baking the cake. Mostly with any process when it comes to baking a cake, the first thing you're going to do is cream the cake. The creaming process is something that's usually done with your butter, then your sugar, and then eggs. So some recipes, and most baking recipes, it usually causes for that particular process to occur almost in sync with the butter first, and then you add the sugar, and then you add the eggs. In this particular recipe, it's egg yolks, but most baking recipes is going to be, an egg. So as you can see, I added the sugar, and you want to kind of allow the ingredients to mix very slowly. I don't add it all at once. I like to stop and make sure that it's all mixed together before I add everything. I find a lot of times that's a huge mistake people make when they're baking. They just dump everything at once. And with cake, it's really a science. And so when you see terms like layer the ingredients, that's what they mean. They mean add one part first, mix, add the second part, and then you add the next part. And so that's what you're actually seeing me doing by layering these ingredients. In this particular recipe with the German chocolate cake, you actually add in the egg yolks, one yolk at a time. And so it's kind of hard to do, but you can definitely see the separation of the yolks, and you're going to see that I slowly add each yolk one at a time, and then I mix. Now that I have added all of my egg yolks, you'll see that the texture of the cake is starting to change. And then from there, I add in my German chocolate and the coffee. Now we can start adding in the flour very slowly. And we're going to add flour, then the buttermilk, mix, add flour, then the buttermilk, and mix. And you'll see as I'm baking, I like to use my baking spatula to ensure that even though I have a good mixer, that I'm helping it along the way by adding in the portions around the bowl. Now that the cake batter is completely incorporated, you're going to set it aside, and then we're going to prepare our egg whites that we are going to fold, not mix, into the cake. Okay, now we've cleaned off our mixing utensil, and we're going to add the egg whites that we set to the side to the mixing bowl. I like to start it on low to begin with, and then I allow it to get higher and higher as the texture will start to change. And you'll notice at first it's going to look yellow, and then the color of yellow will ultimately change, and eventually it will actually turn white. And you're going to do this until stiff peaks form, and if you keep watching, you'll see exactly what I mean in terms of the stiff peaks. Voila, with no additions or anything whatsoever, you'll see that the egg whites have started to almost foam up. It looks very creamy. If when you pull out the mix, it is not forming a peak, it's not yet ready. And so that was the process that I wanted to really show you guys. Eventually, if you keep mixing it on high, you'll see that stiff peaks do begin to form, and you're going to move your mixer out, and you'll see that there's a top peak right at the top of the egg whites. Now we're going to retrieve our batter that we've already set aside, and I like to first add like a huge dollop to the top of the batter, and then I mix it from outside in, making sure to touch the bottom of the bowl, coming all the way up to the top. This is something that you're going to do gently. You don't want to use a mixer. You want to use a baking spatula or something where you can kind of control. Now once it's completely mixed in, you'll start to add the other pieces of the egg white, and you'll continue to mix, stirring from bottom to top, making sure that it's fully incorporated. As I mentioned before, this particular recipe, I'm going to be also sharing some just general baking tips. Now, when I was growing up, and a lot of you probably like to eyeball your batter, especially if you have like 3 different ones. But what I like to do is use the kitchen scale to weigh out how much batter is in each amount, and that way my layers will be even. That's what I do, but you can certainly eyeball it. There's nothing wrong with eyeballing it, and believe it or not, even with the eyeball, I wasn't too far off with the grams that I put in each bowl, but I did have to add some and then take some from another bowl and so forth, so I can make sure that they were even. You want this to be even because it makes it much easier to stack, and I'm going to show you right after we finish this how I make even layers. Okay, as if you needed one more kitchen gadget, but this to me has been amazing when it comes to getting those layers perfectly even. They sell these baking, they're almost like cake belts, that's what I call it, and you can put it around the cake pins. And the reason you do that is because you want there to not be a dome while you're baking, so it keeps your layers even. It's perfectly oven safe and you're gonna love it. Now we're going to start making our icing. Of course, I'm going to have ingredients and details in the comment section as well as on the blog, but you'll see that this is one of those low and slow kind of processes, and there is a portion where you do add egg whites. Now, I know some people like to add nuts to their German chocolate cake, and I would do that, but I'm actually allergic to nuts, so I don't add nuts to my recipe, but I do add coconut. So you're going to bring this icing to a boil. I like to whisk the ingredients while they're on the stove, just to kind of help them along to make sure they're all nice and incorporated. And then you're going to set it aside. You cover it and set it aside once you've mixed everything and then added all of the coconut. A lot of recipes call for 7 ounces of baker's coconut, but I actually like to use 14 ounces, and that's because I don't have nuts in there, but I like to have that crunchy flavor. It's certainly up to you, but I love for this recipe to really kind of all come together with the crunchiness and the chocolate. It's just perfect. So use the amount of coconut that you like, but for me, I like using 14 ounces. Now that we have mixed the coconut in the other parts of the icing, we're going to cover it and set it aside. You want your icing to be cool, so we're going to set it aside while the cake is cooling. While the cake is cooling, I'm going to take this time to tell you about my cookbook, From My Kitchen to Yours, which you can get in the description box. I have sweet potato pie. I also had red velvet cake and all types of goodies that I have not shared on my YouTube channel or my blog. So make sure you check out the comments so you can get a copy of your book. And I included a special coupon code just for you. Now, back to the German chocolate cake. Now we're going to start icing our cakes. They have been totally cooled, and if you notice, I did put a little bit of icing on the bottom of the cake before I started icing it. I saw a cake person do that one time, and it's kind of like a piece of glue to make sure that the cake layers do not slide or anything on the actual cake platter. For this is the actual platter I'm going to use to ice the cake, and then you're going to cover the cake completely. And from there, as you can see, I've already eaten a couple pieces. That German chocolate cake was the bomb. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, let me know down in the comments, and make sure you subscribe. I have more recipes coming your way
every week, not just baking, but some great cooking videos. And make sure you check out the comments for your special coupon code just for you. Love to love you. Talk to you next time. Bye.